It looks a lot scarier than it really is. You want to take your Bibles and be opening up to Ruth chapter 1. Well, they say that your kids grow up fast, but recently I have discovered a way to make time slow way down. And anyone can do this. It's not very expensive. All you need is a couple of these metal holes, and you just use them as your primary means of getting from place to place. But I want to start by just expressing my thanks and appreciation for the brothers and sisters here at Broadmoor. The past 4 weeks, from the moment I was hurt, I've had people helping me. I was carried to my car after I tore my Achilles. People offered to watch my kids. People were praying for me. I've had people bring meals for my family, send texts, write cards, offer gifts, mow my grass, and sit with my wife while I was in surgery. As an athlete and a father of 4 small kids, I have never felt more down and discouraged about my situation. But as a Christian and a member of this family, I've never felt more loved and supported. And so I just want to say with all of my heart, thank you for your kindness and your generosity. I also want to say to those of you who have mobility challenges that I have a much greater appreciation for the effort that you put forward to come and to be with us here. And so I just want to say that you are an encouragement to us just by your presence. I want to thank the elders for accommodating my situation. This is the first time that I've gotten to preach in shorts. In our family, we have some serious readers. The kids will get into a book, and it is almost impossible to get them out of it. And there was one afternoon we were driving in the car, and I was trying to tell them something, and I said, "You need to close your books." And one of them said, "Can I finish this chapter?" And I said, "Okay." And about 5 minutes later, she was still reading, and I said, "I thought I said to close your book." And she said, "Well, I'm not finished with the chapter." I said, "Well, how many pages do you have left?" And she says, "There's 12 more to go." I said, "Well, why don't you just finish the paragraph and then close the book?" In writing, the end of a chapter is the conclusion of a section or a series of events. When the next chapter begins, it could be a different location with new characters, new scene that is unfolding. When we're reading a book, we have a desire to get to the end of the chapter, to see what is going to happen. But books aren't the only place where we find new chapters. We also see them in our lives, and that's what I would like for us to think about for just a few moments this morning, facing the next chapter. And I'd like for us to look from the story of Ruth. So look with me in Ruth chapter 1, beginning in verse 1. We'll read the first 7 verses. Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to dwell in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, the name of his wife was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem in Judah. And they went to the country of Moab and remained there. Then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left and her 2 sons. Now they took wives of the women of Moab. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. And they dwelt there about 10 years. Then both Mahlon and Chilion also died. So the women survived her 2 sons and her husband. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had visited his people by giving them bread. Therefore she went out from the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on their way to return to the land of Judah. In the book of Ruth, we see a number of events that show a new chapter is beginning. And sometimes you might say, well, in my life, how do I know that I'm entering into a new phase or that I'm starting this new part of my life? One of the first things that we see from this text is that there is a passing of time. Look at what it says in verse 4. Now they took wives of the women of Moab, and the name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth, and they dwelt there about 10 years. Sometimes you don't know how long the chapter is going to last. It could go on for an indefinite period of time, but other times it's clear. It's going to be 3 years. You're going through middle school, or you're getting your degree at the university for 4, maybe 5 years. Naomi and her family were looking for a fresh start. They had relocated to the land of Moab after there was a famine in Judah, and they found a place to live and apparently had enough to sustain themselves. There was enough there for them to stay for a period of time. But then tragedy struck. Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, Elimelech's name means, "My God is king." He dies and leaves Naomi and her 2 sons alone. When the boys are old enough, she is able to secure wives for them among the Moabites, 2 women named Ruth and Orpah. And the text says that they lived together, the sons and their wives, with Naomi for 10 years. For Ruth, this chapter of her life was being a newlywed, living with her husband, her brother and her sister-in-law, and her mother. She was there for nearly a decade. She's living and listening and learning and watching and growing. And no doubt she has plans for a future and for a family. But then there is an end of a relationship. In verse 5, it says that Mahlon and Chilion both die. Ruth's husband and her brother-in-law both pass away in a short period of time. The author doesn't go into detail about what happened to them or the circumstances of their death. But one thing is clear, and that is that Ruth has entered into a new chapter. Death is a clear and defining event. Even though it is expected, we all know we're going to die at some point. And even when it is anticipated, someone becomes ill or they're reaching the end of their years, death is still a shock. It is an irreversible change that shakes our lives. And whether we accept it or not, it opens a new chapter for us. But it's not just the passing of a loved one. Anytime a relationship ends, whether that's someone we're dating or a good friend moves away, or even just getting a new teacher at school. Last year's teacher is not in the same relationship with you, even though you might see them as you walk down the hall. There is an ending of that circumstance that was previously there, and we enter into a new phase. When Paul said goodbye to the Ephesian elders in Acts 20, the Bible tells us that there was much weeping for all of them, because Paul was saying that this was the last time that they would see his face. Saying goodbye is never easy. It also can happen when we find a new home. Look at verse 7. It says, "Therefore she went out from the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on their way to return to the land of Judah." After Naomi's husband and her sons pass away, she decides to go back to Judah. Judah was where she had come from. There was a famine in the land, and the famine likely was brought on by the disobedience of God's people. During the time of the Judges, which is when this story takes place, there was a continual cycle of the people turning away from God, being punished for their sins, and then God sending a deliverer to rescue them from their enemies. And it seems that when Naomi heads back to Judah, the children of Israel are in a period of restoration. Repentance has come upon the land, and so has God's blessings of food. And so Naomi decides to head west. When I first moved to Nashville, I was 22 years old, and I only knew one other person in the state. It was a young lady that I had gone to school with that had graduated and come out here, but it was like completely starting over. Anytime you move to a new location or a different place, you're starting a new chapter. Even if you move to a different apartment on the other side of town, there are new people that you're going to encounter. There's new opportunities, maybe new challenges that you have to face. Well, what should we do when entering into that next chapter? We learn some lessons from the example of Ruth. Look at Ruth chapter 1 and verse 15. As Naomi is telling her daughter-in-laws to leave and go back to their home, Naomi says in verse 15, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. In one of the most profound statements of loyalty and devotion, Ruth vows to stay with Naomi, to be there with her until the end of her life. When faced with all of the challenges and the uncertainty of entering into a new chapter of her life, Ruth was determined to spend time with this godly woman. Ruth grew up in the land of Moab. It was a place of idolatry. It was a place of immorality. But after coming into this family through marriage, her eyes were opened to a different way. Ruth saw the God of Israel, the God who created all things. And at this point in her life, she's decided that her life will now be tied to Naomi's, that she will have a new people and a new God, the God of heaven. Ruth understood that the best path for her going forward was to align herself with this God-fearing woman. When I was in college, the church that I attended had a Bible study every week for the college students on Friday night at 7 p.m. Now, you know what most college students are doing on Friday night, and when I first heard about it, I was a little puzzled, thinking, how do they get anybody to come on a Friday night, or why are they having a study at that time of the week? And one of my friends, or the person inviting me, said, well, after the study, the guys usually go out and play football or some kind of sport. And I thought, well, I might be able to make that work. But the brothers and sisters at the church understood something, that it was important for young people to be spending time with other Christians. When you find yourself in a new place or a new phase of your life, when you're going through a transition of some sort, you need to surround yourself with people who can keep you grounded, who can keep you focused, who can help you remember what's most important. What are the priorities that you should keep for your life? In Proverbs chapter 4, in verse 18, it says, but the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, which shines brighter and brighter until full day. Who are we drawing ourselves close to? Is it people who are walking in the light? Who, as the writer here says, they're on a path that shines brighter and brighter. When we draw close to those who love God, it's going to fill us with strength, with hope, with resolve to face whatever tomorrow might bring. Notice what else Ruth does when facing this next chapter, Ruth chapter 2 and verse 6. It says, and the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, she is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers. So she came and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. Ruth sets out to go and glean in the nearby fields. This was a provision that was given in the law of Moses. Leviticus 19 told the farmers not to pick up every little piece of grain, but to leave the corners of their fields for the stranger and for those who were poor. And we see Ruth heads out into the field, and through her example, we find her working hard in whatever she was doing. Did you notice what the servant said about her in verse 7? She got up early in the morning, and she was working the entire time until he was speaking. They saw the amount of effort that she was putting forth. When Jacob recounts the time working in Laban's house, this is what he says in Genesis chapter 31. He says, I've been with you for 20 years now. Your sheep and your goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten rams from your flocks. I did not bring you animals torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself. And you demanded payment from me for whatever was stolen by day or by night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the daytime and the cold at night, and the sleep fled from my eyes. Jacob is essentially saying, I was trustworthy. I was accountable. I was faithful. And because of that, God had blessed Jacob greatly. He had blessed him and his family. How can you make an impression on someone? How can you get someone to notice you? How can you gain the trust and the respect of someone that you don't know very well? When you come into a new job or a new team or a new school, the people there don't know who you are. They don't know your past accomplishments and all the great things that you may have done. And maybe they've heard some things, but they want to see it for themselves. They want to know, who is this person and what are they all about? When I was in 6th grade, one of my teachers called me up to her desk during the middle of class, and she handed me her car keys. She said, I want you to go out to the parking lot in front of the school and find my car, and I want you to open it up, and inside there's a bag that I forgot to bring back into the school. And I could hardly believe she was asking me to do this, but I was excited to get out of class for a little bit and go on an adventure, and so I headed out to the parking lot, and when I got back with the bag, all of my friends had these wide eyes. And they started to ask me questions, the boys. And they said, did you honk the horn when you were in there? Did you turn the stereo way up so when she gets in, it's blasting her ears? Or did you take one of the quarters from her money tray? I said, no, I just got the bag and I brought it back here. Actions speak louder than words. And you prove yourself when you work hard and do the right thing, whether that's at your job, in the classroom, on the sports field, or helping one of your teachers run an errand. When facing the next chapter, we need to remember to work hard in whatever we do. We also see that Ruth was helping others that were around her. In Ruth chapter 2 and verse 17, it says, so she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley, and she took it up and went into the city. Her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and she brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. And her mother-in-law said to her, where did you glean today, and where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, the man's name with whom I work today is Boaz. Ruth goes to the field of Boaz, and when she returns, she has an ephah, about 25 to 30 pounds of grain or barley with her. But notice what she does in verse 18. She shares some of that with Naomi. Ruth is a widow. She's an outsider. She has no property. She has no inheritance. She's far away from where she grew up. But yet she takes the little she has and shares it with her mother-in-law. It reminds us of the widow in 1 Kings chapter 17 who provided for Elijah for the flour and the oil, and Elijah promised her that that would not run out until the Lord sent rain upon the earth. When I was in college as a freshman, we were moving into the dorms, and I had brought my little mini fridge in the back of my car. I had a dresser from home. I had all my clothes, and my car was packed to the brim. As I pulled up to the dorm, I thought to myself, I have no idea how I'm going to get all of this up to the 3rd floor. There was no elevator, had to take the stairs, but then the crew showed up. It was a group of guys from some type of organization or fraternity, and they volunteered to help people. And so what would have taken about 30 minutes by myself was done in about 5 minutes. It was all completed. When I came back down to my car, there was another student who had just pulled up. He had a truck, and he was trying to get out some kind of piece of furniture that he was going to put in his room. It was a futon or some kind of couch. It was big and awkward, and I looked at him, and I thought, I hope those guys get back down here real soon to help him with that. No, I walked over and I said, can I give you a hand? When we go through change in our lives, it's natural for us to become focused on ourselves. When we're facing uncertainty and stress, we're thinking about our own problems. But God wants us to look around and to help others, because when we serve and reach out, it reminds us how blessed we are. Finally, we need to trust God to guide our path. The ending of the book of Ruth is one of the most beautiful conclusions to a story that God ever wrote. In Ruth chapter 4, in verse 13, it says, "So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the woman said to Naomi, 'Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer. And may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him.' Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, 'A son has been born to Naomi.' They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David." For Ruth and Naomi, they could have never dreamed how this chapter of their lives would turn out. God took the horrible circumstances that were going on in Moab, and he brought about something amazing. Ruth married Boaz, and after all the years of not having any children in Moab, Ruth now conceives. God blesses her with a son. This Obed would grow to be the father of Jesse, who would be the father of King David. Ruth and Boaz are the great-grandparents of the greatest king to rule over God's people, and ultimately they'd be in the lineage of Christ. When we start a new chapter, there may be a lot of planning that goes into that. Maybe we've done our research. We've gone and visited the school. We've looked into this neighborhood. We've gotten to know this person really well and decided to ask them to marry us. But what we don't know is how the story is going to end. We have a person in our family, and whenever she reads a novel, she goes to the last chapter of the book and she reads the final chapter. And we were asking her why she does that, and she said, "Because I want to know how it all ends as I'm reading through it." Well, for the Christian, we know how the story ends. God is in control. He will take care of his people if we continue to put our faith and our trust in him. Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 5. "Keep your life free from the love of money and be content with what you have. For he has said, 'I will never leave you nor forsake you.'" We're going to close this morning with a song to encourage any who might be here who need to respond to God's invitation. If there's something that we can do to help you in your walk with the Lord, please come down to the front as we stand and sing.